welcome to Risual's public sector broadcast. My name's Tim G and I'm the public sector lead here at Risual. Our public sector broadcast will be a monthly vlog that we will be doing around important topics that will affect public sector services in the UK. Today we're going to be talking about something that's really sensitive in terms of public sector services, but is very apparent in the press today. And that is safeguarding children and its effect on public sector services. So thanks for joining us. I'm really pleased to introduce two people on this public sector broadcast today. Kevin Stevens, who's a quality assurance for the local Children's Safeguarding Board, and Paul Donnelly, who's our Director of Justice. I'm just going to ask them both to introduce themselves and just give a bit of detail on how they've got here today. Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin Stevens. I'm Quality Assurance Officer for the Local Safeguarding Board in Rotherham. I'm a qualified social worker. I've been working within the public sector for 25 years this year. The reason that how I came here today is primarily as the LSCB we have a responsibility for overseeing safeguarding, the effectiveness of safeguarding across in Rotherham. And as you'll be aware, Rotherham has been within the British media quite highly over the recent past. And one area that we were trying to look for was looking at how we could embrace technology around our information sharing. So that's how we first came across Risual.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. And Paul?
So I'm Paul Donnelly. I've been working in the public sector most of my working life for the last at least 20 years almost. I've been recently working with the Youth Justice Board at the Ministry of Justice. I worked in the local authority with youth offending teams, where obviously child protection and safety and well-being of children is quite prevalent as a sort of primary concern. So I joined Ritual about nearly a year ago to head up the Justice Solutions innovation. So again, we're looking at where we can be more innovative, where we can have solutions for issues, problems that are out there. And although I've got a justice background, it's been very much more public sector focused and wider than that. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, so I've got a number of questions for these guests today, and the first of which I'm going to ask Kevin is, Kevin, can you just give us an indication of where do the services around safeguarding children currently sit within public sector?
Well, I think we have to remember that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. And so at a national level you have that because of statute, and so therefore because of various bits of legislation it has to sit within the public sector. When you move up to a more regional sort of basis, you have the local authorities, and each of those then has a responsibility to ensure there's a delivery of safeguarding services. So that's including your health, police, youth justice and local authorities. If you take the LSCB, who I work for, there has to be an LSCB. Statute has been clear since 2004 in the Children Act then, that what they felt was that every local authority had to have a board of senior professionals.
And they're from each individual, that could be from police, education...
The agencies that have to statutorily be part of that LSCB are in the statute. So as you say, that's the police, that's health, it's probation, it's education, and it goes across right the way through really into the third sector as well. And LSCB would invite those partners.
So ultimately you're hosted by the local regional government entity.
Yes.
But you have an impact from senior representation from most public sector services.
The way they work is that you have an independent chair who is actually technically employed by the chief executive of the local authority, but they are independent. And they have a responsibility to publish an annual safeguarding report on the effectiveness of the safeguarding arrangements within that area. And so what sits under that is that you have to have people of a senior position in each of those statutory agencies who can bring and basically provide an account and an assurance that this is how effective safeguarding is for that area.
And be held to account, I guess.
They are held to account, and that's done through something what's called a Section 11 audit, and that's in most authorities is every 2 years, and they have to provide evidence of how effective they're being. And that covers a variety of standards. That includes how do you listen to young people and develop services from that, through to what are your governance arrangements, and more importantly, how do you work together and how effective are you at working together?
Yeah, that's brilliant, because I think most of the people that will view this probably won't know where LSCB, Local Children's Safeguarding Boards, fit, so that's really clear. Any other comments on that, Paul?
Yeah, so they're much more of a strategic group, aren't they, in a way, in terms of they don't deal with the day in, day out child protection issues, so they overview those.
They're not operational, and they also don't commission services.
Yeah.
So actually, that's right, they're not a provider in that way. Yeah, very much the truth. So they're the people actually will sit down and say, this is the issue that we have. How are we going to deal with it, and what can you bring to the table from those agencies so we work together?
Just might be worth talking a bit about another term again for people out there, MASH, so the multi-entity safeguarding clubs. And some local authorities have them set up, others call them different things, and you've got a MASH in Rotherham?
We have a MASH, it's relatively new, it's been launched for just over 12 months. It's a shift really away from, in previous terms people talked about working together, and you would have some co-location. And really, once you get underneath, what they found was when you got underneath the rhetoric of that, actually people really weren't working together. What they were doing, it was handy because I was next to you and I could speak to you as opposed to ring you. But in terms of what MASH is trying to do, MASH is really trying to bring that more together. I suppose is making it more about integration as opposed to just co-location. And so that's about saying, I want your opinion, your professional judgment, and I'm going to share my professional judgment. And together what we should be able to do is get a far more rounded, accurate assessment around risk. So what you would hope you would have within a MASH is a much more seamless journey from need through to protection. So it's more than just thinking this is around high-end child protection issues, which a lot of people think MASH is just about children who've been abused and you have to go, well, MASH isn't about that. MASH really is about saying, how do you, in the region that you are, how do you effectively ensure that everybody's needs are pointed to a service, and that's what MASH is about.
So it's not just an operational function, it's also looking at the preventative, the strategic.
Because actually, if that's been part of the problem, hasn't it? Historically, part of the problem is everybody's worked in a little bit of a silo. It's like, I deal with this and you deal with that. And then people fall through the gaps. What you want with the MASH is you want to be able to say, whoever you are, whatever that need is or concern you have, you'll never be NFA'd, and that means, no further action. You'll always have a response. The response might be, oh, did you know if you went to that GP practice you could get that help, or if you went to that youth centre you'd get that support there, right the way through to sitting together having strategy discussions because children are being abused. So it's really about a more effective way of being integrated in terms of
That's great. I think that really gives me some clarity on that, and great that you've got three-letter acronyms in LSCBs as we do in IT. So what are the typical challenges that are in the kind of day in the life of delivering these services, Kevin?
Well, it's a good question, and it's one of those questions where your first response is to go, where are not the challenges? Yeah. I suppose the first thing is to put it into the context, because obviously of the period of austerity that we've been in, there's been a huge, unprecedented level of reduction in terms of funding across the piece, really. That's through third sector right the way through to local authorities. That brings challenges. Just in terms of numbers of people that you have around you in terms of service delivery. So the first challenge I suppose that brings is how are you more effective with less? And that makes you having to start to think about different ways of working. And I suppose if you could argue that there is a plus side of austerity, one of the plus side, and it's only a small plus I suppose, is that it's really made people realise that actually you've got to have connectivity. You can no longer sit there in your big local authority or your health sector thinking
in silos.
It's me and I only have to worry about how I deliver my bit. Actually, you no longer have that resource to do that in isolation. You become far more dependent on each other because of that. So actually the realisation that you have to have greater connectivity is a positive.
And this is really true multidisciplinary team working here. It has to be in action.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key to this, and that's hence why really the need to sort of embrace IT in a more positive way, as opposed to just seeing it in the old traditional ways of that it's your recording system and it's your management suite. It's actually how do you begin to use that to be more creative. And that can be around how do you bring decision making, so instead of decisions having to go all the way up a tree, how do you sort of impart decision at a lower level? So some authorities are choosing to allow social workers to make decision making at a lower level. And really what Ali Munro in the review, she talked about that, it's about professional decision making.
And of course, when we're looking at around decision making, I guess we're also looking at about making use of information for insights for critical service needs, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at serious case reviews of children, the common theme, one of the usual suspects that always comes up is about it was a failure around communication, and we'll learn from that. And so actually it is that information sharing and information sharing in real time. How do you do that, and how do you take that forward? Again, I think we do need to think about how our systems do that, and certainly the development of MASH and those sorts of things are assisting in that. The other thing is it's also about practice. It's about us looking at how do we make better practice. It's not necessarily always about individuals. It's about what is the model? What are the models that we use?
So is this more about process or productivity, or both, a mixture of both? Or?
I don't think it's necessary. I don't know if you can distill it down and say it's that or it's this. I think the key is that we have to look at how we historically have delivered and done things has to change, because we've reached a point where we know that isn't working anymore. So actually one of the things that we're looking for is to have innovation through the leadership they have. You know, in Rotherham we've got a very enthusiastic new Director of Children's Services. He's passionate about bringing new things to Rotherham and looking at the way in which we're working. And I think that's one of the big challenges, is to say, a classic way you might want to manage is to say, what can I control and what can I deliver on? But that's a very old-fashioned style really of managing in the public sector, because really what the systemic management should be about really is about saying, how do I manage my people so that they can integrate and work with others more effectively? And I think that's one of the challenges. How do you take a workforce that are quite happy to sit in their own little world, I suppose, and do what they have to do? How do you shift that?
Innovative thought, inspiration.
Absolutely, linked with the use of the things around you and the tools that you've got.
Notwithstanding, getting the job done
Absolutely. But it's a more effective way, a better way of engaging with young people and with families, capturing their voice effectively, making sure we have the right information at the right time, because what you'll get then is far better interventions being delivered in a proactive way, probably better than we've ever done before.
Excellent. Paul, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think just from again, everyone's got their own sort of story, and I think it's sometimes local flavours as well with all the various LSCBs we've spoken to and various teams. And I think coming back to sort of the challenges question, I think sometimes it's what makes my area unique, and actually the changing face maybe of issues with children, whether that's being driven, what we talk about technology and areas of social media, or whether it's cultural changes and how services can adapt to what's the next big risk, what's going to happen, what don't we know about yet. I think that's a challenge. And I think in inner city environments, compared to rural environments or suburban areas, it's again it's not a one size fits all. And that transition of young people as well. We've worked with a few safeguarding children boards in London, and around that transfer of people and how that information can move around, how they can share information. Obviously, I come much more from an information sharing background, but what we've heard, sort of out there, is that sometimes, we record things in one way here, and they don't record it in the same way over the next door, therefore we can't compare. So that's a bit of a challenge on a local, regional and national basis of, what's the number of young people that are, currently, sexually exploited. It's difficult for people to answer that sometimes, locally, and then draw that kind of picture up. So I think that's one of the sort of key kind of challenges around sort of the information sharing area things. But I think certainly on that, people moving around and being able to share share that information.
Yeah.
And also, I know we've spoken before, there's a service talking about, just about, we're working with what we know about, and, talk about firefighting, and we're dealing with cases that have happened.
Yeah.
And actually, it's very difficult for us because we're using our resources to deal with those cases, and quite rightly, but at the same time, if we had that ability, that capability to look further down the line, to see what's around the corner, we could prevent harm from happening in the first place, or we could spot harm that's happening earlier and prevent further harm from happening. And actually, that's where some of the savings are in terms of our effort and getting in the game. So being able to pull that together, I mean, it's very difficult because, as Kevin's mentioned, people are flat out, flat out delivering services, and you never get that. Oh, can we just have a couple of weeks off just to sit back and think strategically where we're going to put those systems in place?
But this is a challenge across the whole public sector, isn't it? It's about moving from what has been a reactive service to something that could be more preventative or proactive. And to your point, I've used this in many a time talking about business intelligence, but having some business intelligence systems that are giving you a rear view mirror view, what's happened is not going to ever get you to a point where it's proactive or preventative. So how do you have that foresight to look where you're going and make service decisions that could impact on children's lives and well-being?
Because primarily, I suppose, safeguarding services are a wraparound service for victims. It tends to go there. Actually, one of the things we need to think about is how do we work with our young people as they're coming through, so that actually we prevent people going on to commit societal, in society we need to address the issue. What is it that fundamentally means that we have a society at the moment where to sexually exploit children is happening? So actually, you're right, there needs to be that intelligence and that use for us to think, not only do we need to react and respond and make children safe here and now, but we have to think, if we don't work with this generation here, how are we going to prevent those offences occurring in 5 or 10 years' time? And so it's that.
Because the opportunity is now, isn't it?
The opportunity is now. You have to begin to look at how do we use our knowledge and our understanding to be able to say, actually, we need to invest in education programmes in Y7 and use technology there that helps them to understand what a healthy relationship is, and do that work, because that might, as you say, change that culture or change whatever that is meaning that in society certain norms are developing.
And this brings me very nicely on to my next question.
Right.
Okay, so a question to you both again. Do you know what the future holds for service needs in this sector?
It's another one of those questions, isn't it? Crystal ball time. But I think there are some things that we can look at that definitely sort of give us some indication of where the future is. I suppose one of the things that we need to think about, where are the needs going to be within the UK. Certainly from an LSCB's perspective, we find within our area that neglect and children where there are concerns around them being neglected account for more than 50% of the referrals that come into the services, and certainly children who end up on child protection plans. So I think how we effectively respond to that's going to be a really big future challenge, because that's a significant amount of children, and I think that if you look at the national statistics, I think it's a similar sort of percentage. Now, and rightly so, over the last number of years, there's been a real focus on sort of child sexual exploitation and that end of issues. But actually, going forward, what we're going to have to do is think about how are we going to take that strategy forward, and whether that means that there'll be a national strategy or not, I don't know. But certainly that's linked, and within some areas of the press, the question comes about poverty and about sort of the government and the targets that were set through the last government and into this one, about how we're meeting our targets around sort of child poverty. And as austerity hits, I think all of those things are going to play.
So is there a point here about education as well, and educating children earlier, not just to protect them in their current state, but also to set the scene for their thoughts and behaviour in the future?
I think there's clearly one of the key drivers that we should be all aware of is the need to engage with young people, to hear what they have to say, and listening to the voice of children and the families, because that's when we'll really truly begin to understand what it is that they actually need, and what they think, and how what they think of why they may not be engaging in services, or why certain things are happening. So in terms of sort of being able to develop services that really truly meet need, and respond effectively, we have to get smarter at being able to engage with people. You'll know that actually whenever you do surveys or you try to engage people, there tends to be two extremes. People who will give you feedback, the people who've either had a very outstanding experience and want to tell you how good it was, or people who've had a really rubbish experience and want to tell you how difficult it is. The people in between, the grey people, they're the ones that you perhaps do want to engage. The people, and that's the hard group, isn't it? The people that normally don't engage.
And I guess this is so important on this subject to gather that almost that soft intelligence that's out there to give us early indicative signs of what might be going on, and equally the future of the service has to be underpinned by having easier access for people, those people in the middle, to just be able to highlight.
I think it covers the whole gamut of that. I mean, it's about how can we gather information that's, if you want to say soft intelligence, where there's no hard facts. Yeah, you need to be able to gather that. That's helpful. Builds pictures, and it's pictures and builds connections, and that in itself will allow you to sort of then hopefully target interventions. So you might suddenly see a spate of information coming from a certain region within your local authority. You say, well, actually, we've not noticed that before. What are we going to do about it? So you can be a little bit more proactive and start to say we need to think about how we do that. But I think more importantly is about how do we actually use or develop methods to engage people so that we understand fully what it is they're experiencing, and not waiting for the fact that actually we only engage with them when they're in crisis. And so that comes down to that early help, and we talked earlier about having a seamless way through where all services actually are working together, so that you're not waiting for it to say, oh, it meets threshold now, and therefore because it meets threshold we can do something. Or a way people say, oh, that's not us because it's not severe enough yet, or you haven't done that. Actually what we need to be working, the model that we need to have now is that we need to be working more effectively together, so that's an integrated approach. So that the reality is that if we have, sorry, I've gone dry, so you'll cut this bit out and I'll carry on. Integrated approach. So that will enable you to sort of say, actually, the best place to deliver this part of the service might be within the education arena, and it might be that you have some education program that's delivered to Y7s or Y8s about healthy relationships. That might be an approach that you take from the information you've gathered, because you've noticed that you've started to get a number of referrals through from teenage relationships where there's violence. What we haven't been good at is linking that together across agencies. You might have it within one agency, or you might have it over there, but actually in terms of that coming together, we've not been as effective.
Paul, any comments on that?
Yeah, I can just reinforce, I suppose, what Kevin's saying, in particular around, a lot of serious case reviews that come back. It's around that sharing that link of information. Everybody knew a piece and a bit of that information, and how we can, really sort of bring that to the fore. And you mentioned soft intelligence earlier, Tim, and that data, and how that could be better used. I know one of the things that we've spoken about before, and I think one of the facts out there is that the 400,000 children, young people who are abused each year, that I think in roughly a third of cases, people didn't report abuse because they felt that they needed to be certain that abuse was occurring, or they felt it wasn't their role, responsibility in their place. And I think I just wonder, does the education of the child, the young person, to help them, give them the life skills to avoid, prevent coming into harm, and there's also maybe even that kind of community or layperson education around spotting the signs something doesn't quite sit right there, who do I report that to and how? Because they might have a key bit of information that they think that's just a one-off. I'm not sure, quite about that. But if I know how to feed it into the right person in the right place, so I think there's a bit again about that education and awareness as well of people in the community. So that coming back to the very first point, it's everybody's responsibility essentially.
But you have to have clear pathways that people know where to go with it, as opposed to in the past someone might pass that information, oh no, that's not me, and then they don't know where to go with it. So it's actually making sure that whatever you have, and I suppose interesting, we've talked about, when you have using technology in terms of if you have something that might just be a concern about a number plate that you've seen a number of times in a certain place, where does that go? Who holds that? How do you pass that information? Because you rightly say that might be a piece of the jigsaw that makes sense of other information here. So finding a system that allows you to pull that together is really important. And you mentioned earlier, one of the other barriers we've got is that we don't have shared language. And there's not a common language. So if you talk about risk to a police officer and risk to a health worker, paediatrician, it's all different. And so that's the other aspect that we need to begin to do, is to try and look at how do you create a common language so that we are all talking about the same thing. And I suppose part of what the DFE campaign was about is about that. It's about saying, don't be frightened to get it wrong. If you see something, say something, as it were. And I think that's part of that general sort of openness, that conversation that we need to have about this is okay. It's okay to ring up and ask that question and report it.
Or deliver that through an app, or deliver that through some kind of other media, channel shift the way, make it easy for people to do that other than a call. Okay, that's good stuff. So thanks for joining us today, and I really do hope you found some interest in the discussion that we had today. I would ask that you like, share and subscribe to this public sector broadcast vlog, and equally we'd love to hear from you on any of the links provided here, on any comments that you may make or would want us to do to make this better for you. Thanks again.